ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to week number 7, day number 4 of Da Vinci Tree's online learning. I'm Mr. Roll, and coming to you from my home office right here, right now, but in just a minute I'm going to jump over to the school to do our joke of the day and then our pledge. But for this morning, before we do our joke and our pledge, we have to announce our May birthdays. Now, normally we'd be doing the May birthdays in person, but as you all know, we can't do that this year. And so we didn't want to forget about any of you kids. You all are very important to us, and so we wanted to take a minute to recognize your birthdays. Now, if you have a birthday in June, don't worry, we're going to be celebrating that coming up pretty soon. The birthday celebrations for June are going to be I think they're all going to be next week. And we're also going to be celebrating July around that same time. Now, why would we be doing that next week? Why wouldn't we wait until June? Because the very last week of online classes are in June. Well, the reason for that is that during the last week of online classes, we're going to be spending those days announcing the winners for the honor roll, high honor roll for the third trimester. And since all of those days are going to be taken announcing awards, we won't get a chance to do the birthdays, or we might forget, and we definitely don't want to forget. So we're going to be doing the birthdays, not next week, but the week after that. I'm sorry, I'm losing track of things here. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful teacher's assistants right now so they can read off all the birthdays for May, and we can sing to you as well. Okay, so let's pass it on over to them.
Go. No.
Hi, I'm Mr. Levi, and I'm reading May's birthdays. First, we have Chance in kinder, Zoe in 4th, Aubrey in 7th, Charlotte in 3rd, Kira in 8th, Javier in 2nd, Tylesia in 6th, and Aaliyah in 4th. 3, 2, 1. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear students. Happy birthday to you.
All right, well, big thanks to the TAs for doing that, and it's time for our joke of the day. So, again, these are all just cheesy and kind of fun. And so today's joke is, what do you call a bear with no ears? I'm sorry, what do you call bears with no ears? You call them B, because ears are E-A-R-S, and like bears are B-E-A-R-S, so they're just a B. Yeah. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know it's a terrible joke. All right. Let's go ahead and get to our Pledge of Allegiance. So, wherever you are at home or maybe at your grandparents or whatnot, let's go ahead and stand together. If you're wearing a hat like I am, let's go ahead and take it off. Place your right hand over your heart, and let's say the pledge together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I'll be honest with you, it's kind of weird saying the pledge every day just by myself. Sometimes I feel awkward and I even forget a line. But anyway, just one of the things that we're dealing with these days as we are all waiting for everything to get back to normal. So I hope you're having a great day. I hope your family and you are all staying happy and healthy, and have a wonderful week 7, day number 4 of online learning. We'll see you tomorrow. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another day of online learning. Today is week number 7, day number 4. And before we get to the nitty-gritty, I have a new hat to introduce. So, yesterday, I was wearing this hat. I'm trying to break out all of my fun hats. This hat is from Annapolis at the United States Naval Academy. My entire family, all of the men, are veterans. In fact, I think I'm the first male in my family line in recent memory that is not an American veteran. So it's a little embarrassing for me. Instead of going into the military, I served in nonprofits overseas in like developing and third world countries. But I'm still very proud of my family that were veterans. And so I wear this since my father was a naval midshipman, and this is a very like American, proud to be an American military family kind of hat. And so I wore this yesterday. Now, all of my hats are too small for my head. I have this freakishly large skull. And my wife likes to tease me for having a big head, which is literal, not like metaphorical. And so it doesn't go all the way on, even on the like the highest setting. And so I have to undo the back. And even when I undo the back, it looks like it fits okay, but if I turn too far, you can kind of see it back here, and so it's kind of ridiculous. So none of my hats fit properly, but I still like to wear them. I always have to buy extra big hats. Anyway, I prefaced all of that by introducing today's hat. Today's hat might be a little controversial. So today's hat is a communist Russian hat. So this hat is a Russian military hat. I believe that this hat was worn by one of a team of tank operators during the Cold War, and so I believe this hat is from I want to say the 1970s, and I believe it came from the Ukraine or Ukraine, as they say in Russia, and so this is a real hat worn by a tank operator. That a guy I know was in he was in Russia right after the communist government failed and communism fell, and he actually bought it from the tank operator who was out there, and then he gave it to me. And in Russia, it's extremely cold, and so here you see the hammer and sickle, which is kind of like the big Russian theme. And then because it's so cold in Russia, they have these super thick earmuffs, and inside here, I don't know if you can see that, but there's actually an earpiece inside both ears, and it's almost like when you wear over-the-ear headphones. The headphones are actually built in to the hat itself, and it has these super beefy leather straps on the bottom, and this is an old-school communist Soviet plug that the tank operator would plug into a cable. So the tank operator would sit at his or her, it's mostly him because it's mostly men, but the men would sit at their little tank station inside of their giant tank, and they would plug this into their uniform, and then the uniform would plug into the tank. And so it's just really cool. Oh, and you can actually unclip it here, and you can see like the headphone portion of it. But again, this whole thing was designed to keep them super duper warm because in Russia it is a frigid wasteland. And it's a really well made because this hat is easily 50 or 60 years old. I don't remember exactly what era it's from, and it's still in great shape because it's so robust. So I'm going to be wearing this hat today, and because my head is so stupidly large, it doesn't fit. So I'm just gonna do this. My glasses. Okay. Good as new. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda for today. Okay, so for today, the longest thing that you're going to be working on is life skills, believe it or not. Every day we're going to be doing a break in a class, and so I've strategically chosen a very time-consuming class to take our break today because our life skills lesson is probably going to take a good 20 minutes. So I want to go over with you how to read a high school course catalog. A course catalog is a book or a PDF that has all the courses that a high school offers. And so we can go through and talk about how to choose your required classes, figuring out what the prerequisites are, and also navigating your way through electives. And so we're going to spend a full 20 minutes or so talking about that. Now, so that is the first thing we're doing this morning in life skills. This is a great life skill that for many of you is going to be very important very soon as you choose your schedule for your new high school wherever you end up going. Now, all high schools are pretty similar in the way they do this, so it doesn't matter that the high school I'm using to teach this to you is Academy of Tucson. So all high schools have it. And also, if you are in 7th grade and you are not going to high school next year, if you want to skip this, you can. And it will make your day of online learning significantly shorter. Again, it's about 20 minutes long. Next up here, we are going to be talking about digital contact tracing. Yesterday we talked about manual contact tracing. Today we're getting into digital contact tracing and a really cool collaboration between two companies that are usually at each other's throats, but they're working together to make the world a safer place for us humans. In social studies, we're going to be talking briefly about the Grange movement and about the positive and sometimes negative effects of the westward expansion on the country, the way it looks, and specifically the economy. In literature, we're going to be reviewing chapter 19 and going over chapter 20. And then in science, we have a couple pages to reread together, one page that's new, and then you have to answer these 4 questions. And then finally, math is going to be the break today. You don't have any math homework, you don't have any math videos, no math. That's your day off of math, so hope you like it. All right, enough of this. Let's go ahead and get to our life skills for the day, which is learning how to read a course catalog and figure out what your high school schedule is going to look like. All right, let's get into it. And gentlemen, for today's life skills class, we're actually going to be taking about 5 to 10 minutes here, and we're going to be walking you through a real-life high school course catalog. Now, a course catalog is a book that lists all of the high school's courses, and so we're going to be taking a look at required courses, elective courses, and prerequisites today. As you can see, we're looking at the Academy of Tucson high school prerequisites here. In their course catalog. Now, we're going to talk about things that are good about Academy of Tucson's course catalog and their offerings, and some things that maybe are not as good. And so we're going to be open and honest about this. Academy of Tucson, as you know, is a great high school, and it's actually a high school that we've recommended a lot of you to. But we're going to be honest here about some of the pluses and minuses about the school. Before we get into it, one of the reasons why we recommend Academy of Tucson as a high school for many of you is because they have a small school environment and a staff that really cares. A lot of our staff are alumni of Academy of Tucson. You know, they've been there in the past and they can tell you good things about them. So Academy of Tucson is definitely a decent school to go to. They've been around for a while, since 1986 here, so they're they're almost as old as me, so they've been around for a while. Okay, anyway, let's go ahead and take a look. So this is their course catalog. They don't call it a course catalog because it's a lot smaller than most course catalogs, so they just call it a course description, and this is for last year. And so let's take a look at their requirements. And so here are the requirements for you to graduate if you go to Academy of Tucson. So you need to have 4 English credits right there. So 4 of your classes over the 4 years that you're at their high school need to be in English. Another 4 classes need to be in math, as you can see here. And they have this little asterisk right here, that tiny little star. And so that tiny little star means that there's more information about it below. And so right here, so out of your math, you must include 1 credit of Algebra 2 or an equivalent course. So you get to choose any 4 math classes you want, but one of them needs to be Algebra 2 or on that level. And so right here in science, you need to have 3 credits of science, but you can kind of pick and choose which science classes you want to take. But you must have 1 credit of those be biology. So biology needs to be taken. It needs to be one of those 3, just like Algebra 2 needs to be one of the 4 that you do in math. Okay, next up, you need to take world history or geography. So that's nice, you get to choose. You need to take 1 credit or 1 class of U.S. history. And you need to take 1 class of American government and economics. They're combined into 1. It's kind of like the way that we teach you U.S. history. At the beginning of the year, we go over American government and we review the Constitution every year. Super important. And we also talk about economics, like the supply and demand stuff that we've been talking about as well. And so it's stuff that you're all familiar with. Next up, 1 credit of art and technology. Over the 4 years that you're in school, you have to take 1 class on art or technology. And then electives, like we talked about, optional classes, you get to take 7 optional classes. I think that's pretty cool. So this is for your normal generic or general diploma. And then they also have something called a college prep diploma. Now the college prep diploma is a little bit more rigorous, and here's why. You see right there, it requires more science. And so you have to have 4 credits for science, or 4 classes for science. You have to have 4 classes for social studies, not just 1. You have to have 4. See, so actually, social studies, my bad. All 3 of these classes can be considered social studies. So if you want to have your college prep diploma, you need to take these 3 classes and then 1 other, so that satisfies this social studies requirement. And then you need to take 2 classes or 2 years of a foreign language. And so as you see right down here, there's 3 asterisks. So it must be 2 credits of the same foreign language. So you can't take Japanese 1 year and then Spanish the next year. You'd have to take like 2 years of French or 2 years of German in order to get your college prep diploma. And then still have 1 credit of art and tech right there. And then lastly, your electives are actually cut down. And the reason why is that with all of the additional requirements that they're asking for you for your college prep diploma, you can't have as many fun classes or optional classes, and so we have to cut down on the electives. Now, the reason why they have the college prep diploma is because most universities that you would apply to are looking for that foreign language class and are looking for a strong background in science and social studies. And so you don't just need English and math, you should have those as well if you're on a college or university track. Right down here, it talks about the legal requirements from the Arizona Board of Regents. And so the Arizona Board of Regents is the board of directors, basically, for Northern Arizona University, Arizona State University, and the University of Arizona. So if you're like, wait, what? University of Arizona is the big university here in Tucson. Arizona State University is the big university up in Phoenix. It's the largest university in Arizona. And then finally, Northern Arizona University, or NAU, is up in Flagstaff. And so I've had the privilege of going to all 3 of these. My wife and I graduated from Phoenix up at ASU. I went to NAU for my master's degree, and I go to U of A a lot because my wife works there. I didn't actually go to school there. And so all 3 of these universities are controlled by this Board of Regents. And so these Board of Regents have put together these competency requirements for entering Arizona's universities. And so if you look here, these requirements are why we have a more rigorous college prep diploma, or why we see that here for Academy of Tucson's college prep. And so you see we have the foreign language requirement right here for our universities for 2 years of a foreign language. That's why they have that. And they up to science and social studies because not all of their science classes are lab sciences. And as you see from the Board of Regents, you need to have 3 lab science credits from high school to get into a university. Okay? Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, I don't know if I'm going to go to a university or not. Or you might be thinking, well, I want to go to a university, but I don't want to stay in Arizona. I want to go out of state. Maybe you want to go to California or Oregon, Washington. Maybe you want to go back east, or you want to go to Texas or something like that. Now, most universities that are out of state have similar requirements to this list. So it doesn't really matter where you go. You want to have something similar to what you're seeing here if you are on a university or college track. If you're not sure, if you're like, I might go to university or college, and I might just go to a trade school, I'm not sure, it's best to keep your options open as possible, so that when you're in 8th and 9th grade, you're not limiting your own future and the things that you might want to do 4 or 5 years down the road. So for all of us, it's best if we try to meet these requirements in order for us to get into a college or university, if that's what we want to do after high school. So I would encourage all of you to look into that. All right, now here is something that is a little bit negative. Whoops. Need to get back to my spot. It heard me say something negative and it just kicked me out, right? Okay, course descriptions, there we go. Okay, so here's something I don't like about Academy of Tucson. Well, this part is pretty standard. This is the same grading scale we use at Da Vinci Tree. It's 10 points per grade level, so 90 to 100 is an A, 80 to 89 is a B, that kind of thing. That's pretty normal. But here's the thing. We talked about weighted and unweighted GPAs the other day. So it says all grades and therefore student GPAs are unweighted. Oh, shoot. Despite level of course rigor. Ouch. So that's really bad. Again, I'm a big fan of Academy of Tucson, but this policy is not good. The reason why this isn't good, let's talk about this for a second, okay? Let's say that you graduate from Academy of Tucson and you want to go to a really good school. Maybe you want to get into the University of Arizona's medical program. It's a very good medical program. Maybe you want to get into Arizona State University's architecture program. Very good architecture program. Maybe you want to get into the marine biology program at UC Santa Cruz. Actually, is that, yeah, marine biology at UC Santa Cruz, or marine biology at, what's another good one? Not necessarily Berkeley, they're okay. Maybe UCLA. You want to get into marine biology at UCLA, which is the University of California, Los Angeles. And so if you want to get into a really good program somewhere, you need to have a high GPA and you need to have honors and AP classes that you've already taken. Now here's the rub. When you are applying to get into college, you are competing against other high school students who are also applying to get into that same college, because the university that you're applying to only has so many seats and there's more than enough people to fill them. So for instance, they might be accepting 10,000 students for their new freshman year in college. And so when you're a high school senior or a junior and senior, you're applying to be a freshman at one of these universities, and they might only have 1,000, let's say 10,000 position open. If they have 10,000 slots open for 10,000 students, they probably have something like 25,000 students applying. And so they have to pare down the number of students. And one of the quick ways that universities like to pare down their student list is just by GPA. A lot of universities, a lot of the good universities say, okay, if you have anything less than a 3.2 or anything less than a 3.4 high school cumulative GPA, you're out. We're not even looking at your application. Ouch. And so if you go to Academy of Tucson and you take all AP classes, every AP class that they offer, you have some of the toughest course schedules and you are prepared for college. The fact that your grades are unweighted hurts you compared to kids that went to other high schools that had weighted grades. Because all of those weighted classes are being counted a whole grade level above where you're being counted. And so that's why keeping all of their GPAs unweighted can be hurtful to students who want to go to high-performing universities. Now, if you are like Mr. Roll, I did not go to an outstanding university. I went to Arizona State University. Now, I like Arizona State University, and I went to a very good program in Arizona State University at the W.P. Carey School of Business. So I went to Arizona State University is a decent university. A lot of people know it. If you say Arizona State University to somebody, a random person that you meet somewhere else in the country, they probably know that it exists and that's a thing. So that has that good name recognition. And the college that I went to, W.P. Carey School, for business and economics, it's a decent program. It's one of the top 50 programs in the country, or at least it was when I applied. I don't know where they are these days. But there's a big difference between top 50 and top 10, okay? If you want to get into one of the top 50 schools, you need to have, you know, like at least a B average, and you can get in pretty easily. If you want to get into one of the top 10 or 15 schools, then you must have pretty much a straight A average, maybe a few B's sprinkled in there. So it depends how competitive the school that you want to get into is. Now, if you want to be like many of my friends, and you want to go to a community college or some other kind of program like a trade school program, you don't have to worry so much about this unweighted GPA. So again, if you want to do community college, or if you want to go to a program that's not one of the top 50 ranked programs in the country, or if you are going to, again, a trade school, community college kind of program, you don't have to worry about this. But for all of us, you do have to worry about this. So this is a red flag for any of you who want that for your future. Anyway, so let's keep on going. It talks about AP classes in here, or advanced placement. That's good. It talks about your course load every year, how to register. Good stuff. Okay, and then here we get into our course requirements. And so one of the reasons why I wanted to go over this one with all of you for life skills is that it's very simple and straightforward. So for English courses, again, you're required to take 4 English courses for this high school and most high schools that you go to. So you need to take 4 years of English right here. See, so 4 years, boom. Now, just because you need to take 4 years of English doesn't mean that you and your friends are all going to be taking the same classes. So in 9th grade, you have English 1, 2. In 10th grade, you have English 3, 4. 11th grade, you have English 5, 6. And then 11th grade, we also have AP English, Language and Composition. And then in 12th grade, you have these different options. So let me review. If you went to Academy of Tucson, you and all of your friends who were in 9th grade would be taking this class, English 1, 2. It is a required class, and this is the only class that fills that requirement. Then in 10th grade, you'd be taking English 3, 4. You'd all be taking the same English 3, 4. But when you hit 11th grade, you'd have an option. So your English requirement could be filled by either English 5, 6 or by this other English AP class, and they would both fill that English requirement. Again, one is a lot harder than the other one, so that's why Mr. Rowe thinks it should be weighted, but that's okay. They both fit. And so suddenly you won't be in the same English class with all your friends. You'll be split up. Same thing for the 12th grade year. You can either take English 7, 8, or you can take Writing 101, 102. Writing 101, 102 is a basic college course that most freshmen in college take, and you can take it right here in high school, and so you get that college credit done before you're even in college, which is super cool. So then, last but not least, you can take this communications class, and even though it's an English class, it doesn't count towards your English grade. See where it says elective credit only? The elective credit only means that it will not count towards filling your English required courses. All right, same thing with math. And so starting in your 9th grade year, you can either choose to take algebra or geometry, or both if you want to get them out of the way. In 10th grade, you could take geometry or algebra 2. In 11th grade, oh, was that it? Oh, in 11th grade, you could take either algebra 2 or pre-calculus. And then in 12th grade, you're going to be taking pre-calculus, AP calculus, or intermediate algebra. So again, you have 3 different choices for what you want to take when you get into 12th grade. And so again, it's meeting the required classes, but you have these options, so you can choose one of them. All right, science courses, it works the same way as these last 2 that we just talked about. Social studies, same deal. All right, foreign language courses. Now remember, foreign language courses are not required just to graduate, but they are required if you want to get that university level diploma and then go to an Arizona university. And so you have your choice of Spanish. Now look, you actually have 3 years of Spanish right here and a 4th year for AP Spanish. And this 4th AP Spanish year actually gives you a boatload of college credit. And so you're only required to take 2 years of a foreign language like Spanish if you want to get that university diploma, but you can take these other years as well. So you might be thinking, Mr. Roll, what happens if let's say I take 4 years, or no, let's say I take 3 years of Spanish, all right? If you take 3 years of Spanish, 2 years of Spanish go to filling that foreign language requirement. The 3rd year counts as an elective credit because it's something extra that you did that you didn't need to do. Now, as you may recall, if you're doing the university requirements right here, you have 2 years of foreign language, and then you have 6 electives. If you took 3 years of Spanish, that would knock off this foreign language requirement, and it would knock off one of your elective credits. All right? Let me go back here. Social studies, foreign language, okay? And then they also serve other languages, so you can do French, German, Chinese, Latin. Now, Latin's a dead language, which means nobody speaks it anymore, but you can still take it, which is kind of funny to me. Fine arts courses. So you did have a fine arts requirement. If you took more than one of these fine arts courses, then you could count it as elective. Now, let's talk prereqs for a minute, or prerequisites. And so if you wanted to take Chinese 3-4 online, you would have to take Chinese 1-2. So successfully completing that first Chinese 1-2 class is a requirement or prerequisite for taking Chinese 3-4. And remember, a prerequisite class is a class you need to take before the class that you're looking at. And so some prerequisites aren't classes. Sometimes you can have a prerequisite that is something that you need to have that's not a class. For instance, yearbook. So if you wanted to do yearbook at Academy of Tucson High School, you could actually get high school credit for it. It counts as your fine arts credit or an elective credit. But your prerequisite is you have to have a teacher recommend you. So you have to get a written letter from a teacher saying that they think you would be great. Some prerequisites can include auditions. It's almost like getting on a sports team, like in high school. You have to audition, or you have to go to tryouts. You basically have to go to tryouts here if you want to get on the advanced women's choir. And also, if you are in the advanced women's choir, I'm assuming that you probably have to be a woman. So Julio and Toby, sorry, I know you guys are very disappointed, but I don't think you can make it. You too, Charlie. Sorry, guys, can't do that. All right, that's it for today's life skills. This list goes on for quite a while, but this is actually one of the shorter course catalogs for a high school. Most high schools have a much thicker course catalog, but I deliberately chose this one because it is a school that I recommended to many of you, and also it's shorter and simpler in the way that they break it down. All right, I hope this was helpful kind of going through this. I want you to know that going into high school, you don't have to plan out all 4 years of your high school in your first year. And in fact, for some of you, it's probably healthier just to do 1 year at a time. But if you want to plan ahead and make sure that you can take all the fun classes that you want to take, all the prerequisites, or I'm sorry, all of the electives that you really are excited for. Most high schools have like a pottery class, they have driver's ed, they have home economics, which is like a cooking class, which is really cool. If you want to make sure to hit up all the fun classes that you are interested in, maybe like a robotics class or something, you can actually sit down and plan out your classes way ahead of time. Which is, again, something that I recommend if that's what you're into. All right, enough of this. Let's go ahead and jump into our current events for today. All right, so today for our current events in economics, we are discussing a different kind of contact tracing. So yesterday we talked about contact tracing in in real life. It's called manual contact tracing, where an actual human being, who some people like to call a virus detective, figures out who's infected and then all of the people that they've interacted with and helps them quarantine to stop the disease. Manual contact tracing is the only proven way to stop these infectious diseases that have no cure in their path. COVID-19 is a virus, and viruses, unlike bacteria, don't actually have cures. Bacteria has antibiotics, and antibiotics kill bacteria. But viral infections, there is no antiviral cure-all in the same way that we have antibiotics. And so these very infectious viruses can be stopped through this manual contact tracing process. But just as we discussed yesterday, as Americans and Europeans, we have a natural tendency towards protecting our privacy. We don't like to have the invasiveness of manual contact tracing pervading our society. It's just a little too creepy for us. And so because of that, we're suffering from higher rates of the virus. And so Google and Apple, two companies that are constantly fighting each other, have combined forces. And these two companies have combined forces to create a way to do contact tracing that is digital and does not require a manual human being doing detective work. The wonderful and basically the Google-Apple effort is, in a word, it's astounding. Two of the very largest tech companies on Earth that are normally violent competitors against each other are combining their top engineering minds to create a unified system that will work on all Apple and Android phones the same. And it is a system that allows individuals to track whether or not they've been in contact with a person who has a COVID-19 infection. And so it is a wonderful system that does an excellent job protecting the privacy of everyone who uses it. So because this system does such an excellent job in randomizing its codes, not collecting data for location, and also not sending the data back to a centralized server, it gives you all the information you need to know about whether or not you've been around somebody who's been infected, while also protecting your privacy. So they've done everything they can to create contact tracing that has zero drawbacks. And so if yesterday you saw the contact tracing stuff and you were like, wow, this is great because it fights the disease and there's a lot of hope there, but it's not great because I like my freedom and I don't like being spied on, okay? If that's what you thought yesterday, this digital contact tracing from Google and Apple actually balances both really well. It gives you a lot of the pluses of normal contact tracing without the minuses of losing your freedom. Now, the best thing to do, what public health experts are saying the best thing to do is to do both. Have the manual contact tracing along with the digital contact tracing. So most of the work is handled by the digital contact tracing, but when we actually do find an infected person, we have a real human being follow up with them and make sure that we caught everybody that they've been around and could have infected, just so we make sure this disease doesn't spread. So in reality, the best thing to do is a hybrid approach with both of them. But in states like Arizona that don't have a robust contact tracing system in place, for us to use one of these digital systems that should be released sometime before the end of May 2020, that is probably our best hope. So for the rest of today, your only homework for economics and current events is to watch a 5-minute long video from a news outlet called The Verge. The Verge is an excellent news outlet that reports on technology and technology-related issues in the news. And so they do excellent reporting. They have easy to describe breakdowns of how things work. And so the Verge reporter, he does an excellent job of kind of showing you the very high level form of what digital contact tracing is and how it helps protect your privacy while also keeping you safe. And so go ahead and watch that video. That is your only homework for today. All right, let's go ahead and move on to U.S. history. Oh, someone's at my door. All right, so today in history, we are talking about the economic development in westward expansion. So the westward expansion of the settlers from the East Coast into the West had many different effects. Some of the effects were very negative in terms of what it did to Native Americans, in terms of what it did to some parts of the environment. For instance, like the buffalo population, there used to be literally millions upon millions of buffalo that would run all up and down the American continent. But what happened with the westward expansion of settlers, settlers would kill the buffalo. And sometimes they would export the meat and the hides as leather. And other times, people in the trains heading towards the, wherever they were going, the towns or the farms that they were going to, a lot of times settlers or just people on trains would use the buffalo for target practice. These large, majestic creatures would just be gunned down for fun, and people wouldn't even stop the train. They'd just shoot them as they were going, and it was almost like a video game for them. And so that's how the buffalo almost went extinct. And so there were some really bad consequences of this, but there were a lot of good ones. So America opened up for the first time and became a really massive country because our continent of North America is huge. And when we started making use of the inside of the continent, it really increased our standing in the world. The railroad was critical to this because the center part of the United States was incredibly hard to travel through. People who settled in the central states, or what we call the breadbasket of America today, in states like Kansas and Oklahoma, and maybe like North Texas, places like that. The people who settled in these places, the most difficult part of the settling process typically was, one, the journey. Making the trip there was incredibly difficult, very dangerous, and a lot of people died just trying to get there. Two, once they got there, it was very hard to make a life for yourself and not starve to death. Because once you got there, you had zero support, You couldn't just like call an Uber to take you back home, or you couldn't mail out for like an Amazon delivery for food if you were hungry, right? Once you got there, you were cut off from the rest of the world, and you had to figure it all out yourself. So danger number one was just getting there. Danger number two was once you got there, how did you not die from starvation? How did you survive? And then danger number three was a mental and emotional danger, because once the people got there, once they set up a farm so they wouldn't immediately die of starvation, then came the loneliness, because you're in the middle of nowhere. The average plot that people were given when they settled was 160 acres. That's a really big piece of land. I don't know if you thought about that. And 160 acres is your land, and then your neighbor gets another 160, and your neighbor gets another 160. And so your houses are not lined up like in a normal neighborhood. Your houses are really far apart from each other. Sometimes it would be a good half a mile to a mile often to get to the next person's house. Sometimes, when in the book Where the Red Fern Grows that we were reading in class, it could be many miles until the next person's house. And so these people were incredibly lonely and cut off from the rest of the world. The railroad changed all of that, right? Because with the railroad, you could get from the East Coast to somewhere in the center of the country within days. It no longer took months or at the best case, weeks of travel. You could get from the center of the country to the coast in a matter of 2 or 3 days. And the travel was safe. And so the first thing that often killed the settlers, the travel or the trip, was no longer an issue. Then the second part, surviving, not starving to death. The railroad helped solve that too. And if you're wondering, well, how did it help solve that? With the railroad in action, people were not nearly starving to death as often, because when they needed food, they were able to mail order different supplies. They could mail order seeds for their planting. If they had a bad year and all their seeds died because of some kind of pestilence or something like that, they could order new product. They could order emergency supplies. They could order canned fruits and vegetables if they were hungry. Okay? And the third thing, social isolation, the railroad also greatly helped that, because suddenly, even though they lived in the middle of nowhere, these settlers had an opportunity to go back to the East Coast and visit their family when they saved up enough money using the railroad. And so the railroad opened up the United States and the Middle States in a way that no other technology ever had. And so once these remote parts of the country were opened up for settlement with the railroad, and they were made easy to access, large numbers of people started heading to the central states of the United States, and they became farmers. Now, the majority of Americans were still living in the East Coast, in states like Maryland and Virginia, Maine, Pennsylvania, the Carolinas. So most of Americans were still in the East. And the farmers in the central states that were feeding the country and the people in the East, they were far removed from them. The life of somebody who lived in a city like Baltimore, Maryland, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was completely different than the life of somebody who lived on a farm in Oklahoma. These people were disconnected in a way that made them almost like foreigners to each other. And so in order for the farmers who lived in these really rural areas to be taken seriously by politicians, and in order to have their concerns heard by other people in the country, again, a big country that didn't understand a lot of these remote settlers, is these farmers grouped into unions. And these unions, some of them are still around today. They have different farmers' unions, and there was this one union called the Grange, and they became very powerful political forces that not only helped to represent the farmers, but also helped normal Americans who lived in cities understand what it was like to be a farmer and what the farmers' concerns were. And so today for your homework, I need you to read about these people, the westward expansion, the economic expansion of the country, and this period of time where the United States truly becomes an awesome power, just in the breadth of its size and the immensity of our economic output, just the amount of crops that we could grow, the amount of things we could produce. At this period in time, it really became impressive. So let's go ahead and read that. The link is in your homework page, and so let's go ahead and move on to our next subject, which is literature. Oops. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for literature. You may notice my attire has changed since I recorded your last video for, gosh, what was it? Oh, American history. I decided that I needed to work out on my little exercise bike. And when old people like me exercise, we wear unfashionable cutoffs from the mid-90s. That's what we do. All right, so let's go ahead and get on to literature. So you were supposed to read chapter 19 of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer yesterday. And in chapter 19, the story was kind of a shorter one, but it mainly involves Aunt Polly, and she's talking with Joe Harper's mom, I think. Yeah, and she's talking with her mom, and it comes out that Tom's dream wasn't really a dream. Tom was lying. And so Aunt Molly is pretty, or Aunt Polly, I keep on calling her Aunt Molly, I'm sorry. Aunt Polly is pretty upset by his lies. And so she goes back and she scolds Tom. And then Tom is, he tells her, well, I came back and I wanted to tell you guys the truth. And I even wrote it on a note, but I thought it would spoil the surprise. And so I left it in my coat pocket. And so she sends him off, and then she's like, oh, if he really, you know, he's just a boy, he's just a kid. And she's like, all right, I'm going to check his coat pocket. And even if it's not in there, you know, I'm going to try to do my best and be a good parent and not be mad at him, kind of thing. And so she goes to check the pocket, and she finds the note, and she just says, oh, you know, basically I'll forgive him forever and I'll always love him, which is kind of sweet. And so every book that Mark Twain has written that has become popular has been just kind of analyzed like crazy. And so I do remember reading some analysis of this, and the people who spend time analyzing children's stories were talking about how interesting it was that in these past couple chapters, you know, Tom has been really petty. He has been really kind of arrogant and self-absorbed, like it's all about him, and he's not really thinking about those around him. But at the same time, that's part of being a kid. And so Tom's behavior, if he were an adult, would be completely unacceptable. But because he's a young kid and he's still working these things out, sure, they're black marks on his personality and on his character, but it's also something that we accept as, again, part of the growing up process. Another thing that a lot of people like to comment on is in the last chapter, when Tom explained his dream to everybody, you know, Aunt Polly was totally sold. Like, she bought it, hook, line, and sinker, and she's just like, oh, wow, you know, he had this crazy psychic or prophetic dream or whatever, you know, kind of thing. But his brother, Sid, on the other hand, Sid was like, I don't know about that. I don't know about this guy. And so when people analyze the story, there's really two ways of looking at that part of the story. And so you can either say, well, what Mark Twain is trying to get across here is that sometimes grown-ups are gullible and kids are smart. And so that's one school of thought. So maybe Mark Twain was trying to convey the idea that sometimes, even though kids are immature and young, they're actually more perceptive than adults because they have more imagination. And as adults perhaps get older, they become more gullible and less creative. And so some people think that that was kind of the idea that Mark Twain was trying to push in this story. And but a lot of other people, and myself included, I kind of think differently. So the way I look at it is that I look at it and say, well, I think that Aunt Polly fell for the story not because she's dumb and old and gullible, but because she loves him. Aunt Polly really, really cares for Tom, and she's been through a lot, believing that he had died and believing that she had lost him. And then he miraculously, to her, it seems, comes back from the dead and comes back and tells this wild story. And so I really feel that her being hoodwinked or her being tricked in that moment isn't so much an indication that she's dumb or stupid or something like that. I think it's an indication of her relief and love for Tom and just her being really happy that he's back. And I think that perhaps Sid, his cynicism and not believing Tom, is almost a function of him being a little bit of a jealous brother, maybe, not taking it, not really fully understanding the value of life at his young age. And so, oh, Tom's gone and he's dead. Oh, that's kind of sad. A lot of times when kids have a loved one who pass away, they don't understand the impact of what that actually means. And sometimes it could take weeks or months or even years for it to fully sink in. And so a lot of other people who analyze this story say, well, Sid was sad, but he didn't really understand what it meant to have lost his brother if Tom had really died. And so by the time Tom comes back and tells the story, Sid has already worked back to his cynical old self, competing with Tom and kind of ratting on Tom and stuff like that. So he's already reverted back to that because he didn't understand and comprehend that full sense of loss at the funeral that all the adults had understood so much better. So that is kind of the way people view this set of chapters that we just read. Now, literature, I love reading and I love the classics, but literature and poetry kind of are not my forte. In fact, next year I might not be teaching the 7th, 8th grade lit class. It's probably going to be Miss Kimmy or a different teacher. And so sometimes I struggle a little bit with the analysis, but I'm going to try to be talking a little bit more about the message behind the story as we move on. Because that's really what literature class is supposed to be. It's not just reading the story and knowing the story. It's also spending a few minutes and talking about the meaning behind the story. And I apologize again, I'm really more of a science, technology, engineering, math guy than I am like a classical lit guy, but I'm going to try to be all things for you. And I'm even going to wear my silly hats. All right, so that's it for literature today. It's time for us to move on to science. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time again for science class, but before we jump into, gotta turn off my email. Whatever, you guys, it's no big deal. Before we jump into the main lesson for the day, I want to acknowledge the only student who did the science extra credit and therefore gets 20 extra credit points to boost up her grade incredibly, and that is Mariah. Congratulations, Mariah. You got the only extra credit, and so let's go ahead and take a look at the photo that she sent in now. This is the photo, and I think that is either Mariah or her mom, and they were playing Bernoulli ball, and she said it was a lot of fun, but unfortunately her mom beat her, and that's okay. Adults might have better hand-eye coordination for playing a game like that, so congratulations to you, Mariah. You get the 20 extra credit points for Bernoulli ball. So, ladies and gentlemen, because I am so very nice and I wear such ridiculous hats, I want you guys to still have an opportunity for extra credit. So, out of fairness for Mariah, she is the only one that gets 20 points of extra credit, but if anybody else turns in the extra credit assignment between now and, let's see here, next Wednesday, so that would be, gosh, my mind is blanking right now. I think it's the 20th of May. If you turn in the assignment for Bernoulli ball, you got to tell me what the score was, who you're playing against, and give me a picture so I can show it to everybody. If you do that between now and next Wednesday, which is, I believe, the 20th, I will give you 10 extra credit points. So you can't get the 20 points anymore, but you can still get 10 extra credit points. It is quick and easy, and it's only mildly embarrassing. All right, so let's go ahead and take a quick review of what we went over yesterday. So yesterday we were talking about efficiency. All right, the day before that we were talking about what a machine is, and we were talking about how machines do three things. So a machine either increases the force, it increases the distance, or it changes the force's direction. So a machine is anything that manipulates the force in those ways. I feel like I'm teaching the Jedi school or something like that. But a machine manipulates force and makes work easier by, again, increasing force, increasing distance, or changing direction. So, and then right here, the book definition, changing the amount of force, the distance, of the force or the direction. So basically what I just said. We have input and output. Cool. All right. The formula, as you all know, is work equals force times distance. Cool. We talked about how we calculate force. So when we're looking at mechanical advantage, which is what we went over yesterday, mechanical advantage is calculated by the output force over the input force. So input force is on bottom, output force is on top. It's simple division. So if the output force is 3 newtons and the input force was 1 newton, 3 divided by 1 is 3, and so the mechanical advantage is 3. If we have an output of 4 and we have an input of 2, then the mechanical advantage is 2, because 4 divided by 2 is 2. So it's that straightforward. So again, mechanical advantage, output force divided by input force. So when we're multiplying force, so when we're using what's called a force multiplier, we're multiplying force in a machine, the mechanical advantage is always greater than 1. So again, in this first example, mechanical advantage is always going to be greater than 1 when we're multiplying force. All right? Now, when we're using mechanical advantage to multiply distance, then it's always going to be less than 1, because we are putting in more force and getting less force coming out, so that we are going over a longer distance. So examples of, again, machines that go over longer distances are bicycles. When you pedal a bicycle, in that moment you are exerting more force than you would be if you were just walking, but that force, it amplifies your distance, and so you go a lot further with that amount of force. Okay, I'll try to stop saying okay. Another one is a ramp. So with a ramp, you're actually putting in more force, but it's going over a wider. Actually, no, ramp's a bad example. No, actually, ramp, I guess, is a good example. Well, no, because the distance. All right, forget I said that. All right, anyway, let's move on. Mechanical advantage, I think I just confused myself. I apologize. Mechanical advantage on multiplying distance is going to be less than 1. So you don't get numbers like 2 or 3. You get numbers like a half, a quarter, 0.6, like 0.6. And then when we're doing a change in direction, the mechanical advantage is 1, because we're not getting more or less. We're just changing what we already have. And so anything like the number 5 divided by another 5 is always going to be 1. And so mechanical advantage when we're changing direction is 1. And then yesterday we talked about efficiency of machines. So kids, because life is not just an easy math problem, we have different things in life that cause inefficiencies. So for instance, yesterday we were talking about how a pair of scissors, if you've ever used like a clumsy pair of scissors in school and you're like, I can't cut, and the paper's not cutting, and you're having to put in a lot of extra work there, that's an example of an inefficient machine. A machine that does not work very well. A machine that does not turn all of the input force into output force because something's screwed up. That's basically what it means. And so we read through this yesterday. Again, an ideal machine would have an efficiency of 100%, but that kind of doesn't exist in the real world. All machines have a little bit of friction in the system, and so we can get close to 100% for some machines, but you're never going to get exactly 100%, because again, it's a scientific term called entropy, and we have friction and things like that, and so we never quite get there. All right, so let's take a close look at this. Okay, so here's a sample problem. You cut the lawn with a hand lawnmower. So these hand lawnmower things, these have been around for many, many years. And so this actually goes before my time. I think the first hand mower that I know that was in my family belonged to my grandfather. And my grandfather fought in the Korean War in the 1950s, which probably means he was using one of these babies back in the probably 40s to cut his lawn. So again, these things have been around since at least the 40s, maybe even prior to that, to mow lawns. So this is an old device. This is before we had gasoline or electric powered lawnmowers. So you cut the lawn with a hand lawnmower. The hand lawnmower, you push it really hard, and when you push it, the blades on the bottom spin, and those blades cut the grass. So you cut the lawn with a hand lawnmower, you do 250,000 joules of work to move the mower. If the work done by the mower in cutting the lawn is 200,000 joules, what is the efficiency of the lawnmower? So you're putting in 250, that's your input, and then it's only producing 200, that's your output. And so efficiency, all right, as you can see right there, is the output divided by the input. Output 200,000, input 250,000. So again, we have it, and they're just stacked right on top of each other here, okay? So we have 200,000 divided by 250,000, and we get 0.8. So if you pop that into a calculator, or if you do your long division, you get 0.8. And then because it's a percent, we have to multiply it by 100, so we get 80% efficiency. So this hand lawnmower right here is 80% efficient. Having used a hand lawnmower growing up in the hot weather in Phoenix, I don't think they're 80% efficient. I'd be very surprised if that were actually true, but this is just an example. I think they're less. Okay, think about it. An efficiency of 80% means that 80 out of every 100 joules that went into cutting the lawn, that means that 80 out of every 100 joules of work went into actually cutting the lawn. This answer makes sense because most of the input work is converted to output work. And so again, this is a very efficient machine if this is true. 80% of the stuff that you're putting in is coming out with the desired result. That's great. So practice problem. You do 1,500 joules of work in using a hammer. The hammer does 825 joules of work on a nail. What is the efficiency of the hammer? So let's go ahead and do that right here with the basic calculator. Calculator. And so hopefully you can see this. I don't think I can make my calculator bigger, can I? That doesn't really help. Okay. So if you can see the calculator, fantastic. If you can't, don't sweat it. I'll speak the things out loud to you. So you're doing 1,500 joules of work for the hammer, and it's only coming out with 825 joules. So 825 is the output. So we do 825, just like that. And then we hit the division sign, and we type in 1,500. And we hit the equal sign, we get 0.55. And then it's a percent, so we have to multiply that by 100 times 100. And we get 55%. So the efficiency of the hammer is 55% efficient. That sounds realistic. Okay, so that's how we do it. Again, we take the output and divide it by the input, and then multiply it by 100 because it's 8%, and we got it. Next up, suppose you left your lawnmower outdoors all winter. It's now rusty. So we don't really have a problem with rust in southern Arizona because it's so dry out here, but pretty much anywhere else you get rust in the bottom of your car and anything metal that you leave outside when it's raining and snowing and stuff. So anyway, of your 250,000 joules of work, only 100,000 go to cutting the lawn. What is the efficiency of the lawnmower now? So the lawnmower used to be 80% efficient because you're getting 200,000 joules out of it for every 250 that you put in. Now that is no longer the case. So let's calculate it out. So we're getting 100,000, did I get that right? Yeah, 100,000 joules that we're putting in, and we divide it by 250,000 joules. I'm sorry, 100,000 joules is what we're getting out. I gotta slow down. 250,000 joules is what we're putting in. So we divide it by 250,000. I flipped it around just a second ago. And so we get 0.4. We multiply that times 100, and we get 40. So now the lawnmower went from being 80% efficient when it was brand new to being 40% efficient now that it's all rusted. You got it? That's how we calculate it out. So let's go ahead and continue here. Should probably move this little calculator out of the way. Calculating efficiency. If you know the input work and output work for a machine, you can calculate a machine's efficiency. To calculate the efficiency of a machine, divide the output work by the input work and multiply the result by 100%. It's exactly what we just did. This summarized by the following formula. Actual and ideal mechanical advantage. The mechanical advantage that a machine provides in a real situation is called the actual mechanical advantage. So again, it's not what we have on paper, it's actually what we see in real life. You can only determine the actual mechanical advantage by measuring the true input and output forces. It cannot be determined in advance because the actual values depend on the efficiency of the machine. And so kids, if any of you are car buffs or you are excited about becoming an engineer one day and working in the automotive industry, or you just want to be a mechanic or something, and mechanics are super cool and we all rely on them to keep our cars running, so I shouldn't use the word just when I say that, but if you want to do any of those things, something that everybody who works on cars knows is that the mechanical advantage, the actual mechanical advantage of a brand new car tends to be significantly higher than the actual mechanical advantage of a used car. So what happens is a car has these things called pistons or cylinders, and in these cylinders they have a piston that goes up and down inside the cylinder. And that piston bobbing up and down inside the cylinder with the spark plug on top that ignites the fuel that creates small explosions, that is what actually turns the car's engine. And so over time, with that piston moving in and out of that cylinder over and over and over again, it actually begins to wear the cylinder out. And so when the car is new, the cylinder and the piston are very tight together. And then over time, as that cylinder wears out and becomes larger and larger, there begin to be the seal that the piston is in there, it begins to leak air. And so air leaks around the sides of the cylinder as the piston's going up and down. And so every time the spark plug ignites an explosion and the piston goes up and down, the piston goes up and down less vigorously. And so when you first buy, like let's say you bought a sports car, let's say you bought a Ford Mustang. When you first bought the Ford Mustang, it might have some really brawny number like 500 horsepower when you first bought it. But as it ages and it becomes a classic, maybe 30 years from now, you give your Ford Mustang to your daughter and you've kept it in really good condition, and so she can drive it. When you first bought it, the actual mechanical advantage of the vehicle right there might have been like 80% or something ridiculous. But after 20 or 30 years of using it, the actual mechanical advantage drops by maybe a third. And so instead of being 80 or 90% efficient, maybe it's only like 60% or even 50% efficient. And that's a real life example of how actual mechanical advantage can be different than what we have on paper. So if you're buying a used car, the horsepower ratings and everything else that you read online aren't actually what you're getting. Because as the car gets older, just like an old pair of shoes, it doesn't perform as well over time. Anyway, that's my soapbox for actual mechanical advantage. Let's get back to it. You can only determine the actual mechanical advantage by measuring the true input and output forces. It cannot be determined in advance because the actual values depend on the efficiency of the machine. And that is precisely the way that used cars work, or older sports cars work. You cannot determine their 0 to 60 numbers, you cannot determine their horsepower numbers or their torque numbers, beforehand, because every car ages a little bit different. You can kind of guess and say, well, it's probably between this and this, but you cannot tell exactly until you actually test the vehicle. All right, anyway, you cannot predict the actual mechanical advantage of a machine, but you can predict the quantity related to the actual mechanical advantage if you ignore losses due to friction. So you might be wondering, what the heck does that mean? But you can predict a quantity related to the actual mechanical advantage if you ignore losses due to friction. In other words, you can consider the machine under ideal conditions. The mechanical advantage of a machine without friction is called the ideal mechanical advantage of the machine. So again, we have actual mechanical advantage, and then we have ideal mechanical advantage. So if you're an engineer or a mechanic, the spec sheet for the car or the plane or the helicopter that you're working on, the spec sheet and the diagrams and all that fun stuff, the blueprints, they hold the ideal mechanical advantage of your machine. But the actual mechanical advantage is going to be different. The more efficient a machine is, the closer the actual mechanical advantage is to the ideal mechanical advantage. By keeping a machine clean and well lubricated, you can make its operation closer to the ideal. In this way, you can increase the machine's efficiency and make your own work easier. All right, so let's go ahead, and you have a couple questions to answer today. And so it's just these 4 questions, but they are posted up on the website. So please go ahead and answer the questions. You can put it in an email. You can write it on a piece of paper and take a photo of it and email it in. But go ahead and answer these questions and send them in to Mr. Barbero, and you can get credit for doing your science work. That is your homework assignment for today. All right, so because today we are taking a break from math. Again, every day for the rest of this online learning thing, I'm going to be giving you a break in one subject. Today's break subject is math, so that means that for me at least, this science lesson is the last one that you're going to be having with me today. Anyway, I hope you had a great week 7, day number 4 of your online learning here. I hope you and your family are happy and healthy, and I hope none of you are feeling lonely or anything like that. And so I hope you all are doing fantastic. And I will see you again tomorrow for the last day of our online learning week. Take care.